Thanks for joining us on World Now. The United States, where President Donald Trump has asked the Russian leader Vladimir Putin to end his nation's war with Ukraine, is our starting point. Taking his oath of office on Monday, Mr. Trump said success would be better measured by wars ended and not by wars won. We have more in this report.
As Ukraine's long-range weapons devastate Russia's oil depots, weapons storage facilities and factories, the U.S. President Donald Trump has warned he will impose high tariffs and further sanctions on Russia if President Vladimir Putin fails to end the war in Ukraine. Writing on his social media platform, Truth Social, he says, by pushing to settle the war, he is doing Russia, whose economy is failing, and its president a very big favor. Although Russia has not yet responded to the remarks, President Putin has repeatedly said he is prepared to negotiate an end to the war, which first began in 2014. But he insists Ukraine would have to accept the reality of Russian territorial gains, which are currently about 20% of its land. He is also highly opposed to Ukraine joining NATO. But Ukraine does not want to give up its territory, although its president has indicated that some currently occupied land may be ceded temporarily. In his Truth Social post Wednesday, President Trump went further to ask Russia to, quote, settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, and the easy way is always better. It is time to make a deal, unquote. Local media say Russia wants to know what President Trump wants in a deal to stop the war before taking any step in line. President Trump's special envoy, retired U.S. General Keith Kellogg, has set himself on a 100-day challenge to achieve a ceasefire.
Now, to discuss President Trump's threat to the Russian leader on ending the lingering war between his nation and Ukraine, I'm being joined by a global affairs analyst, Ejike Okpa, right here in the studio. Glad to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me. A beautiful studio. This is really very nice.
Thank you very much, and it's good to have you. Well, talking about this war, the baseline was from President Vladimir Putin not wanting Ukraine to join NATO. They're eyeing some Ukraine territories and, some other matters. Now, with this President Trump's, hard stance, do you think that it actually overlooks the spark up of the war?
Well, Russia always wanted to expand its territory, and he did it at a time when we had an American president who was weak and we couldn't take on, Putin. Now
when you say weak?
Weak.
Well, Democrats wouldn't want to hear that from you.
Well, what is a fact? Because if Trump was in the office, it wouldn't have happened. But it happened, So what he's doing now that Trump is back in there and given the relationship he has, and we don't want any war. There's no need for wars, especially the unnecessary ones. And so Trump is going to intervene. He's not making a threat, he's making a demand. He's making a request. And Putin has to look at it, and then, the guy in Zelensky has to look at it. The Ukrainians don't want the war. The Russians don't want the war. So the NATO part of it, of course, Russia don't want NATO country next to it, and they're going to push back. That's part of the resistance, and somehow they're going to come to a resolution on that.
So does it seem that President Trump is overlooking those base issues because he doesn't seem to have said anything about those conditions?
Well, he's not overlooking it. He's going to consider them. He can't force Putin to do anything just as well as Zelensky. He's going to get the two parties, everything is a negotiation. He's going to get the two parties together and start to talk, what is it that we're fighting for? And how can we get to a compromising position so that everybody feels it's a win-win as opposed to, winner-loser. Because they're far into it and you don't want to walk away, you're a loser, you're a winner, it's a win-win.
It's just about a month away from it clocking 3 years. That's really a long time. But let's talk about President's stance on this. He's talking, President Trump now, he's talking tough about it. And he has actually, threatened to impose maybe tariffs, sanctions if Vladimir Putin doesn't come to the negotiation table. But do you see Vladimir Putin budge?
Of course, we're going to squeeze and squeeze until you squeeze to the point where Putin said, okay, fine, I have to give up something. It's always something, are you willing to? There's an ego anytime you're dealing with world leaders. But then when you now find that thing that you can push them to or squeeze them to, then that's when you have a chance of cutting a deal. And Trump obviously knows what it is he's going to do because Putin is hurting. Putin is hurting. So most people in the world are not buying the Russian gas. And now America said, we're going to drill. So he's going to look at his own revenue from the natural resources of gas and figure out, okay, maybe I need to give up something in order to keep the cash flow. Because now, the cash flow is tight. He's pushing the brick thing, but how is the brick going to become a currency of the world? We don't know how that's going to happen, but it's not likely to happen.
Well, that's your thought. But let's talk about, the terms of a possible deal. On the part of Vladimir Putin, he's proposing keeping its territorial gains already in Ukraine. Yes. It has about 20% of Ukrainian land. And aside that, of course, it doesn't want Ukraine joining NATO, as it were. How easily do you think a deal can be struck under these circumstances?
Well, it could be, because again, there was a survey that was done, and 50-something% of Ukrainians said they don't want the war. So if it means giving up a part of Ukraine that the Ukrainians obviously didn't even have or need, they let it go. And that's what is going to decide the point of negotiation. Because you don't get to the negotiating table if you don't have the points to negotiate. If it's about NATO, can you grant Ukraine a status, maybe an observer member of NATO without being a member? Just like, we have some members of Congress, like the DC representative in U.S. Congress is an observer member, they don't have any voting rights. So you could say, hey, fine, you be an observer member, but you don't have any voting rights. If that's what is going to soften the hard side of Putin, maybe that's it. Okay, fine, you go do that.
But then don't you see that empowering Vladimir Putin to want to encroach into other territories in the future?
Well, already he's encroached, and, is he willing to give part of that land he's encroached? Who knows? He might say, okay, fine, I've gotten 1 million acres, I'll give you back 200,000, acres or something. First of all, you got to get to that negotiating table and push. Both sides are going to, again, the whole idea is to have a win-win so that everybody goes off with their ego intact, as opposed to somebody feeling, oh, you took advantage of me. And remember, this is former USSR. And since that USSR collapsed, Putin has been wanting to get some of it back, because it's an ego thing. And then the countries that have become independent out of the USSR are saying, no, we don't want to go back to that. Some of them already joined NATO. And so this particular one that he's very interested in holding on to, he's going to do is say, over my dead body. So instead of over my dead body, what is it that the West is going to say, okay, fine, we'll let you have it, but you can't go any further. And it becomes a permanent agreement.
And so talking about, some of the, likely conditions for a deal to be struck, while speaking during the, the WEF forum in Davos, Switzerland, just on Tuesday, President Volodymyr Zelensky said something about if an agreement would take place, then there has to be no fewer than 200,000 peacekeepers, on Ukraine soil. And those have to include personnel from the United States. Do you think the world can actually afford that at this moment?
You already have United States military advisors, but not U.S. soldiers. okay? Because that's putting foot on the ground, and that could trigger Russia to do something else. So you could have military advisors, you could have military counselors, you could have the peacekeeping, people. That's all fine, because the keeping force don't carry gun. They just show up and in their truck and they say, hey, don't cross over. Again, what we want to do, this will be the first time the two presidents will get to a point where both of them are seeing each other and talking. And if we can get that, that's a positive step. But what we want to do is everybody submit your terms of reference. What is it that you want out of this negotiation? And then that way we can see how we can struck a deal. A deal can be made, we just don't know what the deal will be. And it's the deal that we want to say, you win, I win, you haven't lost. Even though the land has been taken. I mean, countries have taken people's land. And we're talking about going to Panama and getting that canal back and stuff. But at this point, because there's been a war, and this was a war we thought was going to be over in a matter of months, and it's gone on like 2 years or something, and America has spent so much money, European countries have spent so much money, they don't want to do it anymore. They want to come, this love thy neighbor thing. How can you be friendly with your neighbor without your neighbor encroaching?
Yeah, it's just about a month to the 3rd anniversary of this war. How soon do you think this negotiation can actually take place?
Well, I mean, if with the new sheriff in town, which is Trump, if he say, hey guys, can we do this in the matter of it may be his first international visit, outside of after being sworn in. They can meet somewhere, and the three of them can meet somewhere and talk. The most important is, can we get the three of them to meet somewhere? And where that somewhere is, we don't know.
And, President Trump had previously said that he would actually negotiate a settlement of this war within 1 day. But it's like it's tougher than he imagined.
Well, campaign is different from governing. So when you say that you arouse people's interest and they're going to vote for you, but then when you now sit down in that Oval Office, you could see the challenges. It's not easy, because now people now know you're responsible for something. When you say it in a campaign, you're not responsible for it. But when you get sworn in, then you get responsible for it.
So now he has to walk the talk.
Yes.
Ejike Okpa, Global Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you for having me. Anytime I'm available.